Okay, so have you ever, like, seen something and then just, like, totally jumped to a huge geeky conclusion about it?
Yeah, I mean, we all do that, right?
Like, I don't know, maybe you see, like, your neighbor has a brand new car,
Right.
and you just, like, instantly assume they won the lottery or something?
Uh-huh, yeah.
That's kind of what we're digging into today, this whole idea of extrapolation, building these, like, grand ideas from just little bits of data.
It's a very human thing to do, for sure.
Yeah, and it turns out it happens in, like, serious research, too.
Absolutely, and that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. We're looking at a paper from 2013, a group of researchers calling themselves RLSPH.
Okay.
They proposed this pretty radical idea, limiting extrapolations in primary educational research journals.
Whoa, really? Why? What was their thinking there?
Essentially, they were worried that scientists were, well, as Mark Twain put it so well, making wholesale returns of conjecture out of such a trifling investment of fact,
Hmm.
basically drawing way too big conclusions from their data.
Oh, I see. So, like, going way beyond what the data actually showed.
Exactly.
And what did people think about that idea? It sounds kind of controversial.
Oh, it definitely sparked a debate. Luckily, we've got this brilliant response to RLSPH's proposal, also from 2013, by Howard Weiner and Brian Clauser. It's called Reflections on a Too Extreme Idea, and it was published in the Educational Psychology Review.
Nice. So we're diving into that today.
Yep, and they use some really cool historical examples from science to make their case against banning extrapolation outright. It's fascinating stuff.
Awesome. Well, let's jump in. So the learner, what we're going to do today is unpack this whole issue. We want to understand why some folks wanted to restrict extrapolation, what the arguments against it are, and what all this means for how we understand, well, pretty much everything.
It really gets to the heart of how we think about knowledge, how science progresses, and, even how you approach learning new things.
Cool. Okay, so let's start with this extreme idea, this proposed ban on extrapolation. What exactly were these RLSPH folks worried about?
Right. So, their big concern was that researchers were getting carried away, making these sweeping generalizations that went way beyond the scope of their actual research. Like, they might study a small group of students and then make a claim about all students everywhere.
Oh, okay, so kind of overreaching.
Yeah, exactly. And they were worried that these kinds of unfounded assumptions could then be used to justify educational policies that might not be, you know, effective or even could be harmful.
Yeah, that makes sense. So
Oh, yeah.
they were basically trying to protect the field from bad ideas, potentially.
In a nutshell, yes. By keeping researchers focused on what their data actually showed, they hope to ensure that educational practices were based on solid evidence.
So their solution was to just, like, straight up ban any conclusions that extended beyond the specific findings of a study.
Pretty much, they wanted to see an end to extrapolations in those primary research journals.
Okay, so enter Weiner and Clauser.
Right, exactly. And they come at this whole debate from a very interesting angle using these historical examples, specifically from Victorian England.
And this is where it gets really cool, the learner, because we're talking about some of the biggest ideas in science and how they came about. Like, they bring up Darwin, his conclusion in Origin of Species. Remember that?
Of course, one of the most famous scientific conclusions ever.
He's basically saying that he's, quote, thoroughly convinced that species have been modified during a long course of descent by the preservation or natural selection of many successive, slight, favorable variations, unquote. I mean, that's a massive statement.
Huge. It's not just about the finches he studied, right? It's a theory that explains the entire diversity of life.
Yeah, it's like he went way beyond his immediate observations to create this whole framework.
Mm.
And Weiner and Clauser point out that Alfred Russel Wallace, the guy who kind of came up with the same idea around the same time.
Right, independently.
And he said something very similar a year earlier in their joint paper. He talked about how in nature there's this tendency to the continued progression of certain classes of varieties further and further from the original type, a progression to which there appears no reason to assign any definite limits.
So again, we see this massive extrapolation, this leap beyond the immediate data to something much bigger.
And that's when Weiner and Clauser do this really clever thing. They compare these, like, groundbreaking conclusions to two other papers that were published in the exact same journal issue, like literally right next to Darwin and Wallace.
It's a brilliant juxtaposition.
And these other papers, one by Thomas Huxley, the other by Robert Knox, they're much more well-grounded, very focused on specific observations. Like Huxley, he was studying the anatomy of Nautilus pompilius.
A type of mollusk, right?
Yeah, and his conclusion is super detailed, talking about a small mammillary eminence with a transverse slit, describing the ovary's position. Very precise, very anatomical.
Very much sticking to what he directly observed.
And then Knox, his paper is about the number of cervical vertebrae in whales, specifically Mysticetus.
Okay.
And his conclusion, super straightforward. The conclusion I arrive at is this, that the actual number of cervical vertebrae in the Mysticetus, as in most other mammals, is 7.
Boom! Just the facts.
So these are the kind of conclusions that RLSBH would probably love.
Yeah.
Right? Very data-driven, no wild speculation.
Yeah, very much in line with their recommendations. But here's the thing Weiner and Clauser point out. Those papers, despite being very fact-based, they didn't really make much of an impact.
Interesting. So being super cautious, actually kind of backfired.
In a way, yeah. Darwin and Wallace, with their bold extrapolations, they changed how we think about life itself. The others, not so much.
So I guess the takeaway here, the learner, is that sometimes the most important discoveries come from people who are willing to, think big, even if it means going beyond what the data immediately shows.
Precisely. And this brings us to Darwin's own view on how theory and observation should work together. He famously said, "I had at last got a theory by which to work." Meaning, he didn't just randomly collect facts. He had this framework, a theory, guiding his observations.
And in a letter, he even said, quote, "How odd it is that anyone should not see that all observation must be for or against some view if it is to be of any service," end quote.
Right. Like, why are we gathering these facts if not to test an idea or try to explain something bigger?
It's like we need a theory, a question to view to make those observations meaningful.
Exactly. It's not about just accumulating data points. It's about building and testing explanations, developing theories that have implications for how we see the world, and even, for policies and decisions.
Right, so it's not just about the science itself, it's about how we apply it. And Weiner and Clauser argue that scientists actually have a responsibility to explain those potential applications.
They do. They have the expertise, the in-depth understanding of the research to explain what the findings might mean in a broader context. It shouldn't be left entirely up to the reader to interpret the implications.
It's like they shouldn't just dump the data and walk away.
Right. That's the idea. They should help connect the dots, show why these findings matter.
It's interesting, they even mentioned this historical example where geologists were discouraged from theorizing, told to just observe rocks. Like they might as well just count pebbles and describe their colors.
Really?
The point being that simply collecting data without a theory to guide it doesn't really get you very far.
Yeah, you need that framework, that guiding question, to give the data meaning and lead to real understanding.
Okay, so let's talk about the actual costs and benefits of, maybe not banning extrapolation outright, but at least, being cautious about it.
Right. So on the one hand, as RLSPH argued, limiting extrapolation could definitely reduce the number of, just plain wrong claims getting published.
Right, that seems good. Fewer bad ideas floating around.
Yeah, less noise, more focus on solid, well-supported findings. But, as Weiner and Clauser point out, there's a potential downside, a big one. We might miss out on those powerful insights that might have changed the way we understand the data.
Oh, so we might lose out on those Darwin and Wallace moments.
Exactly. If they had been restricted to just their immediate observations, well, who knows what biology would look like today.
That's a good point.
And to illustrate this, they introduced this idea of a cost function. Basically, it's about weighing the different kinds of mistakes we can make.
Like what's worse? Publishing a wrong conclusion or rejecting a potentially groundbreaking one.
Right. And they argue that RLSPH's proposal is basically saying that publishing a wrong conclusion has an infinite cost. It's so bad that we should avoid it at all costs, even if it means missing out on something truly important.
Okay, I'm seeing their point.
And they contrast this with R.A. Fisher's approach. He was a very influential statistician, and he established that 0.05 threshold for statistical significance.
Right, the p-value thing.
Yeah. And his thinking was that 0.05 is actually pretty lenient, meaning some false results might get through. But, he argued, science is a self-correcting process. Eventually, those false findings would be disproven. But if you reject a potentially true finding too early, you might delay its rediscovery by years, decades even.
Oh, interesting. So he was more worried about missing something real than publishing something false.
Precisely. The cost of a false negative, missing a real effect, could be much higher in the long run.
So where does this leave journal editors? They're the ones who have to decide what gets published.
Right, and it's a tough job. It's not always easy to tell if a claim is truly supported by the evidence. And Weiner and Clauser point out that rejecting any claim that sounds too bold or ambitious, well, that could have serious consequences.
Like, what if someone really did discover the secret of life or something?
Exactly. Imagine a paper claiming to have found the fundamental mechanism of consciousness. A very cautious editor might just dismiss it out of hand. But what if there was actually something there, some groundbreaking evidence, even if it was preliminary?
Yeah, that would be a huge loss for science.
It would. So it's this constant balancing act for editors.
So what's the alternative to just, like, banning extrapolation altogether?
Well, Weiner and Clauser suggest a few things. They even mention this historical example of Isaac Newton, who wrote his more speculative ideas in Latin.
Really? Why Latin?
Well, back then, Latin was the language of scholars, so it limited the audience for those ideas, kept them within a smaller circle where they could be debated and scrutinized without, causing too much of a stir in the general public.
Well, that's interesting, like a way to control the spread of potentially unproven ideas.
Yeah, kind of, but obviously that's not really practical today.
Right, everyone would just use Google Translate.
Haha, exactly. So they offer some more modern solutions. One idea is to use structured abstracts, like they do in medical journals, with clear labels for each section.
Okay.
So you could have a section specifically for extrapolations beyond the data. That way, readers would know exactly where the authors are moving into more speculative territory.
That's actually a really good idea, the learner. It would help you see, like, where the solid ground is and where the authors are, taking a bit of a leap.
Right, it would increase transparency and help readers evaluate the claims more effectively. They even suggest including that famous Christopher Hitchens quote in such a section: "That which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence."
Oh, I love that quote.
Yeah.
It's a great reminder to be critical and to demand
It
evidence.
is, and it leads us to the question of, what's the actual harm in these unsupported conjectures, especially in a field like educational psychology, right?
Right, like, are we talking about life or death situations here?
Not really. Weiner and Clauser argue that while a bad educational policy based on a faulty extrapolation might be ineffective, it's unlikely to be, catastrophic in the same way that a poorly tested drug could be.
Right, the consequences are different.
They are, and unsuccessful educational approaches are usually identified and revised over time.
So there's this built-in correction mechanism.
Exactly. They even bring up John Stuart Mill, who argued in his book on liberty that even if the truth is suppressed, it tends to reemerge eventually, especially when there's open discussion and debate.
So, like, truth has a way of winning out in the end.
That's the idea. And this brings us back to Weiner and Clauser's main point about what science is really all about:
Which is,
building evidence. And evidence isn't just raw data, it's data that's relevant to a specific claim. So if you ban extrapolations, you're basically saying no claims beyond the immediate data, which means no evidence. And no evidence means no science.
whoa, so they're saying that extrapolation, even though it can be risky, is actually essential to the whole scientific process.
Absolutely. It's about making claims, testing them, refining them, and building a better understanding of the world.
Okay, so the learner, what we've explored today is this really interesting tension. On the one hand, we want to be rigorous, avoid unfounded claims, stick to the data. But on the other hand, we need those intellectual leaps, those extrapolations, to push science forward, to make those big discoveries.
And Weiner and Clauser's argument is that instead of imposing a strict ban, we should trust editors to exercise careful judgment, to evaluate the evidence in the claims, and to make those tough decisions about what gets published.
So it's all about finding that balance, that sweet spot between caution and, bold exploration.
Right. And even then, errors will happen. That's just part of the process. Science is about constantly learning, revising, and refining our understanding.
So the learner, as you go out there and encounter new information, think about this. Where do you see that line between sticking to the facts
Yeah.
and making those necessary, potentially insightful leaps of extrapolation? It's a question that's relevant in all areas of life, not just science.
It is. How much evidence do you need to feel comfortable with a claim? When is it okay to go beyond the data and speculate? These are questions worth pondering.
They really are. And with that, we'll leave you to do just that.
Happy pondering.